by not investing in women, you're missing out on tremendous opportunities and leaving money on the table. So I get incredibly motivated every day to wake up and prove that point, and work with amazing investors, founders, entrepreneurs that are really changing the face of the investment ecosystem, venture capital, the investment industry broadly.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
There's no doubt that women are chronically underrepresented in technology and venture capital. At Pivotal Ventures, Erin Harkless Moore seeks to fill the gender gap we know all too well. Throughout her investing career, Erin has consistently aligned her values with her work. Social impact has always been a priority, but became especially urgent when she transitioned to venture. As the investment director at Pivotal, Erin seeks to expand women's power and influence by investing in female-led funds and backing innovation that directly impacts the lives of family caregivers. In this episode, we learn how Erin embraces social progress across her professional life and how she's helping to advance venture as a result. Here's our conversation. Welcome, Erin. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Christine, for having me. It's a real pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been so exciting for me to get to know you for the past year and see the work that you've done. And I thought it would be fun for our listener to hear a bit about your story and as well as your work at Pivotal Ventures. I would like to start with, what's your journey like? How do you start your journey? You start your career in finance and walk us through.
Sure. So again, it's a real pleasure to be here with you today and with your listeners. So my journey in my career, I like to say it's probably I had no grand plans to be in finance or Wall Street. I don't think many people, frankly, if they say this, they might be looking back with kind of rose-colored tinted glasses that, they know that they want to be an investor or an allocator of capital. I sure did. And I had no idea what those jobs really were until I kind of got to college and started exploring different internships. But for me, I've always been a curious person. I love digging into problems, exploring, new products, new ideas. And I think that as a foundation is in some ways what kind of led me, at least in some ways, on this path that I've been on for now more years than I may admit to on this podcast. But I grew up in Texas. I went to college in St. Louis at Washington University, and from there, I've pretty much spent my entire professional working life on the East Coast between New York, Boston, and Washington D.C. So I started my career at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street. And, back then it's interesting. I think this will kind of be the through line of our conversation of, for me, I am so proud that I get to align my, passion for investing and finance with impact in the job that I do at Pivotal Ventures. But I didn't necessarily start there. And I think that's just a reflection of sort of where the financial service industry and the investment industry has been. And there was a clearer kind of maybe brighter line between the sort of, hard finance and the social impact side. And the latter was more of what I did in my spare time, when I was volunteering and doing work in the community. But when I got to Harvard Business School, that was kind of a point for reflection, as business school often it is, and stepping back and figuring out what the next phase of my career would hold. And the Social Enterprise Club was, and I think still is, one of the largest clubs on campus, and I joined. And it was exciting to see that there were just increasingly more opportunities to align my values with my professional interests. What I had been building, prior to that and going to business school as an investor, and seeing the rise of ESG and more intentional impact investing. So, really, I started my career again at Goldman doing manager diligence. And like I said, I don't think most people think of that as a job to have, but it's equal parts kind of art and science, I like to say, and figuring out the right questions to ask, going back to, as I said earlier, being a just naturally curious person. That balance was always interesting to me. So I've been thrilled, really for the last kind of decade plus at this point, I have been able to achieve greater alignment and harmony in this sort of professional and personal journey for that matter, investing alongside my values with purpose. So immediately after business school, that led me to Cambridge Associates, where I was for over 8 years. And while there, I served as a member of the firm's social and impact investing practice. Many of the clients I served while I was at Cambridge and had the privilege to serve are some of the world's largest foundations, philanthropically oriented families. So I was able to dig in and support them aligning their investment programs with their values and doing some thematic and manager diligence around, areas like gender equity, racial equity, and social equity as examples. And so my job at Pivotal to kind of land, the journey where I am today is in some ways really the best of all of this. I consider myself, again, incredibly lucky that I get to lead this investment team at Pivotal Ventures and drive capital to more women of color, those that have been underrepresented and undercapitalized, but doing that again with great financial rigor. And our principal, Melinda French Gates, has been very clear that she set out to make money with this portfolio of investments that we're building. And, that by not investing in women, you're missing out on tremendous opportunities and leaving money on the table. So I get incredibly motivated every day to wake up and prove that point, and work with amazing investors, founders, entrepreneurs that are really changing the face of the investment ecosystem, venture capital, the investment industry broadly.
It's really interesting. I was just, as I was listening to your story, it reminds me back about my days when I was in investment banking. What drive me then is so different. What drive me now, and your experience at Goldman Sachs. We hear a lot of stories. I think somebody from Goldie wrote an opinion or some. I think was it from Goldman Sachs. We're talking about the work experience there, but. Yeah. Give us a little bit of what you learned from your experience at Goldman Sachs. I mean, it's a really tough place to work, but you learned a lot from it.
Oh, totally.
I would say that I never regret for going the investment banking route because there's so much I learned from it. But I'd like to hear what you learned from it that you still bring to where you are doing today.
Sure. And again, to state, I mean, no better place, like you said, Christine, to sort of start your career or spend time in one's career, the training. I mean, I think some of the smartest people doing this work at places like Goldman Sachs. So it was just a great learning opportunity and kind of setting that foundation that I've just built upon and have continued to develop over the years. But I think some of the lessons I learned, there specifically that carry through is like, just ask questions. And if you don't ask, you won't receive. It's kind of like ask and you shall receive, right? And that's true of, again, kind of putting clients first and just thinking about asking questions all the time and being in a place of inquiry and less certainty, I think is important. And, again, Wall Street can be a boastful place, but I often observe that the folks that seem to be getting ahead, and the lesson I internalized, were the people that were speaking up in meetings and asking questions and sort of pushing, not being satisfied with just the status quo. And I think a piece of that too is just doing your homework in advance. That's something I saw, play out at Goldman and really throughout my career. Do the meeting before the meeting, prepare. It's so important. You think people are just showing up and walking into these spaces with all the answers. No, they're spending a lot of time prepping in advance. And you have to do that at whatever stage you are in your career. If you're an analyst or if you're a partner, the partner is still prepping for the meeting. The CEO is still prepping for the meeting. At least that's been my experience. And I saw that, kind of hands-on in those early days of my career. And it's been a lesson that I've carried with me since.
I think prepping for the meeting, sometimes people don't see it because when you prep, you don't see it. All of a sudden you just showed up. And that's, and it's almost like a theater, I feel, that there's a lot of background.
Right. Before, I mean, and as an example, and this was at Cambridge Associates, a very senior, investor there. I was partnering with that individual on a client, and I had just sort of held this person in such high esteem because I'd been in meetings before, and just had seen how, she had come in and just had complete command of everything, knew the portfolio and remembered, the investment committee chair's son was at XYZ school. And I'm just like, oh, just knows everything. And we happened to be traveling together in advance of this meeting. And she was, I was getting ready to watch a movie on the airplane. She had pulled up, she was preparing, she was going through line by line. And I sort of thought, well, she's so senior, like she doesn't have to prepare. She just knows this stuff. And she was putting in that work, doing that homework in advance and brushing up. And so I put my iPad down and got my notes out and started prepping too, because that's what it takes, right? To really be, I think, again, whatever you're doing as an investor, as an entrepreneur, you have to put in the work. You have to do your homework.
Yeah, I think that there is so much is oftentimes you don't see.
Right.
But I think also I've heard people who memorize their lines sometimes just so that, of course, when you spit it out, it's not completely memorized, but you know your line.
Yes.
And I have perfect example when I was my summer internship job. I thought everybody just showed up, and then mine was lousy. And then my boss was saying, like, this is not cutting it. And that's when I realized, oh, people prepare and memorize their line and present it like it's like a performance.
Yes.
Almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
So one of the things I think as a Goldman Sachs, you do a lot of due diligence, you said. Yep. So what are the things that the work that you, because of your training there, that you brought to where you are now as an investor? And it's kind of also different, I think, oftentimes when you're in at least when I was in investment banking, you tend to see a lot of more like the later stage company. And right. Then now you're working with the early stage company. How is that different? What are the things that you learn from that?
Sure. I think, I often will say diligence is diligence. And I think you learn, or what I learned sort of from those early days and has carried throughout my career, and this is true at Cambridge and now at Pivotal, is you're really trying to get a handle on the people, right? We're in the people business. You're investing, again, in a product or an idea, and that may be more so true at the later stages, but particularly at the early stage, you're backing individuals, right? An individual idea, an individual's ability to create and build and scale something. And so I always come back to sort of that underwriting and assessment of the team, and digging in and understanding their motivations, I think, is really important. That's another thing I would point to, I learned early on. And just the last thing I'd say there too is just the value of kind of triangulation and the importance of references, not taking anything at face value, right? Someone says, this is what we do. Okay, well, not that I just believe you, I don't believe you, but I want to double check and confirm. Trust but verify, another way of saying that. And I think that's been, again, a consistent learning and something that, Cambridge Associates does incredibly well and is, I think, perfected as a model. And I brought that with me to Pivotal, of just keeping track of and watching the room, reading the room, seeing who's not speaking, and then trying to interrogate and understand the why behind that. Particularly in early stage venture, you're investing in these partnerships. It's across the private markets, but for a decade plus, right? These are marriages. People often will use that analogy that you are marrying these partners as a limited partner coming into a fund. It's probably going to be a relationship that lasts longer, sadly, than the average American marriage. So you want to make sure that you understand how decisions are made, how the team works, how people are incentivized and compensated. And that's foundational. And that's something that I picked up, again, very clearly early on. And it's only continued to be made true in the diligence I do today.
You mentioned about read the room, the importance of that. How do you do it now in the Zoom world? And also before the Zoom world, like what are the, if you have like a framework on how to read the room? You mentioned about somebody not speaking, understanding why. And is there other tips?
Sure. Zoom is complicated, this for sure. I'll say that outright. And your ability to sort of assess some of those non-verbal cues and ticks, and frankly, seeing how partners and members of a team relate to each other. Because if everyone is sitting in their Zoom screen, it's kind of harder to read up on some of those more subtle nonverbal cues. So that's probably the biggest difference I call out between in person and Zoom diligence. But again, I think the tenets and what you're looking for are all kind of the same, just how people engage and relate to each other. So I can give you an example of, and this was on Zoom, where people were just talking over each other. So to me, this goes back to like the preparation point we were talking about earlier. Not that you want a presentation that's totally scripted, because that I can also pick up on as well. But it brought into question for me in this one instance of how the communication styles and how this team actually communicates and what that might, again, going a layer deeper, mean for decision making and who has power and things like that. So that's some of the stuff that we're watching for both in person and on Zoom. But I think it's a little bit harder to tease some of that out virtually, and that's why we might take more meetings. One, rely on more references. I think that's something that we've had to do in the last few years as we've been more virtual, just trying to, again, trust but verify and test some of those assumptions or what we've heard from other investors, just having that extra call to see if it's true. But we always try, I think the last thing I'd say is a team here at Pivotal Ventures, to speak, have more than one person from our investment team on every call so that, you're not distracted by the questioning, the note taking. Someone's always watching to be on, to be keeping an eye on some of these factors, and can, message or chat or pass a note to another colleague and say, hey, they didn't really answer, you were kind of moving on. They didn't really answer that question. Let me go back to that. What does that mean that they're not answering that question? Those are the types of things that we're teasing out. And then, you have to debrief after the meeting as well and see what still is to be uncovered. It's a constant journey of discovery. That's why I love this work. So there's always something new to probe on.
I just think it's so funny. It's like when I think about when I was going to school, thinking about work is doing a lot of the work, delivering the work. But, now as I've seen like the work that you do and a lot of the work that we do is a lot about the people dynamic. And it's a lot of observing people. It's like people watching. And somehow we were not told enough when we were young how important it is to observe people.
Yes. 100%. I agree with you there. It's we're often, what's maybe rewarded is the person who's always out in front talking the loudest or the quickest. And I think as an investor, you may learn more by sitting back and watching sometimes, and seeing how others react to information or what have you.
And I think even with all the observing, they tend to be in the ideal situation oftentimes. Mm-hmm. And then as you dive in, and sometimes I think you have that relationship, and then things get difficult. That's when you see another characters.
Yes. When times are good, everybody's happy and is your friend. But when and I've now invested through, multiple kind of, the financial crisis and other blips in the, almost, decade and a half, close to 2 decades I've been in this industry. And like you said, that's when I think there's that old Warren Buffett adage or something about like when the tide goes in and out, right? Like you can see who's been swimming with their shorts on or off. It's maybe a little crass, but I think it's true, right? When things are more challenging, that's when true partnership is revealed. Are you a good partner or not? And so you need to be prepared for that and to have those conversations when times are more challenged.
So now that you have gone through all that, and then I'm sure there's some part that you just feel like that was really challenging,
Mm-hmm.
that I wonder, oftentimes you knew that it's going to be challenging, but then you ignore the red flag because you love it so much. Or is it completely a surprise?
Yeah. No, it's an interesting question because I do think what you can get sort of swept up in whatever it may be, right? An exciting new company that everybody's backing, and even recent press, right? History's littered with the things that were very bright and shiny, and everyone, started deploying capital towards them, and it may not have been all that it appeared to be. And I think, yes, I've also too, I've made many, we could have a whole podcast talking about investment mistakes. Or as you mentioned, mistakes, if you're not doing your job, if you're not learning, and as you said earlier, making mistakes. But I do think it's slowing down is probably the thing I would point to. And we try and build this into our process at Pivotal Ventures of, there are things sometimes where you have to move quickly, but never at the expense of ignoring the flags or the checks or the things that aren't sort of sitting in the right way. And then interrogating why that is, or calling out what might just be a bias, like what versus a flag, and calibrating that. But I think the way to do it, and the way that I've done it, and not always successfully, because like I said, I have made mistakes, is to try and slow down the decision making.
Mm-hmm. So I don't want to finish our conversation without asking you about Pivotal Ventures.
Of course.
And tell us more about it, everything about it, like what the focus areas, the check size, what are the stages, all the good stuff that entrepreneurs usually need to know in order to work with Pivotal.
Well, starting out, so Pivotal Ventures is an investment company founded by Melinda French Gates to advance social progress in the United States and remove barriers that hold people back. So what makes us unique is that we're not traditional philanthropy only. In addition to writing philanthropic checks and using that lever to drive change and impact with philanthropic capital, we also drive social impact with our investment capital. And the philanthropic dollars in some ways are correcting for market failures, but our investment strategy, we're really trying to unleash new market solutions, and support the investors and founders that are doing that. And we're on a mission to bring more opportunity and equality to our country, as I said, and expand women's power and influence specifically. And in order to do that, and this is kind of getting to the execution of our investment strategy specifically, to expand women's power and influence, we have to ensure that a diverse group of people are controlling, accessing, and benefiting from investment capital. And the decisions that we're making today are going to determine sort of who's in the seats tomorrow and who's left behind. And we want to see more women, more people of color, more women of color in those seats, because that's where I think there are great ideas and there's a lot of money to be made. So like I said, our investment strategy, we view and we focus in the early stage, primarily venture capital and private markets. We view venture as a tool to advance social progress, but also advance women's power and influence, as I mentioned. And we're trying to expand the representation of women in tech and in venture through a couple of different avenues in our strategy. Because as I'm sure you know, Christine, and probably true for maybe many of the listeners as well, women and specifically women of color are chronically underrepresented across the investment industry. I mean, you pick an asset class, it's true, but it's particularly true in entrepreneurship and in venture. And again, we can pick our array of stats, but in 2021, PitchBook reported that only 15% of decision-making roles at US VC firms were women in those seats. And if we want to propel innovation and equitable wealth distribution, we need to change that number. We need more women in those seats. So that's really the sort of backdrop of our strategy, high level, who we are as a company at Pivotal Ventures. So how do we actualize this with our investment portfolio? We deploy capital to both fund investments as a limited partner, as an LP, and also direct investments into companies. So I can share a little bit about both of those pillars, and as it sounds like that might be of interest to listeners. So on the fund side, we focused on investing in female-led funds primarily to date. Um, so women-led, again, early stage, kind of pre-seed through early growth rounds, fund size minimum 25 and up. Again, U.S. focus, and outside of that, those are our core kind of gating criteria. I can share some examples if that may be of interest, but that's really where we're focused
Does
on
the
the.
team all have to be women, or can it be mixed as long
No,
as the
it can
women
it
led?
can be, yeah. The women need to be the owner, the GP, majority of the GP decision makers. Again, going back to that stat I mentioned earlier, because I think where the difference lies. I'm all for seeing diverse teams, and we want that in our portfolio, but we want to have, again, advancing women's power and influence, women controlling the purse strings. We want to have that female ownership and leadership be kind of foundational for the fund strategy. So that's the fund side. And then on the direct side, we are focusing on companies that are building in the care economy right now. And so how we define that in a couple of ways, tech enabled or software solutions that will free up time, reduce the stress of caregiving, improving access to care, and support or benefit for the unpaid caregiver. And Pivotal Ventures, we've supported some research that sized the care economy at $648 billion. So, I mean, it's a huge investment space. And this covers a spectrum of themes for us, specifically from childcare, household optimization, future of work, mental health, women's health, aging, longevity, all areas that we're excited and see great opportunity in. The sweet spot for us from a stage perspective with our direct strategy right now is Series A to B rounds, although we opportunistically go a little bit earlier or a little bit later, and always open to meeting founders at kind of different stages of their journeys to build relationships and to track them. And not leading, not taking board seats, but kind of being a meaningful, hopefully strategic check in one of those early rounds.
And so tell me more about the care economy and women.
Yeah.
How is that? Just help us understand the connection.
Sure. So, I think we're trying to address barriers that are holding our country back, holding people back, holding women back at Pivotal to advance women's power and influence. It's a foundational outcome that we're striving towards as an organization. And COVID, I think, showed this, shined a bright light on this, that a lot of caregiving burdens. We're all caregivers at some point in our lives. Agent to your parents, for yourself, for your children, in your community. But a lot of that burden falls on women, and it pulls you out of the workforce, takes time away from other responsibilities and opportunities. And so for us, that putting a dollar amount on that market was very important to show, I think, the investment community and even founders that are building in the space that there's great opportunity here. We need more innovation in these spaces. Policy is not going to do it alone. Government's not going to do it alone. Private sector is not going to do it alone. But I do think, again, there is a strong link to sort of seeing this as a space to really unlock, I think, some great solutions in tech and in the markets to support innovation here that will directly impact the lives of a lot of women and caregivers broadly, but women specifically.
Yeah. I mean, our society is getting older, and then our labor shortages are keep getting harder and harder to find labor. So,
Yep.
And so last question, you've seen a lot of startups, founders meeting with you, trying to get funding. Any advice during this challenging time? Everybody's saying, it's really challenging time, but at the same time, depending on who you talk to. Some people waste money too. So
Right. No, it's a great question, and one that I've been thinking a lot about, to be candid, because I prefer to see the opportunity and maybe where the challenge may be, which is, I think both sides of your question are getting at that. So if I had to pick, one or two things, I point to, the fact that now, talent, there's a great opportunity to bring great talent to the table if you're building at this moment when there's been dislocations. Innovation doesn't stop, I guess, is what I would say. So I would encourage founders to, keep pushing, keep iterating, and some of the best companies are often, and history has proven this, right, kind of out of the ashes of challenging time periods. Again, great businesses are built because I think maybe some of that hype has flown away, and the fundamentals are what matter. So with that, I'd say take advantage of it and focus on the fundamentals, right? Like acquiring your users, scaling your revenue, building a great product, getting that product market fit. Because before, in the last couple of years, you could show up with a napkin and someone would write you a check valuing your company like $100 million. Those days are gone. Focusing on the fundamentals is I think, essential. And as allocators of as an allocator of capital, assessing both fund managers and entrepreneurs, we want to understand what your edge is, and are you building something that's going to be durable and lasting? And so I would encourage, founders, entrepreneurs, and investors to focus on that.
Mm-hmm. And I think I learned also, oftentimes, the more you do, the more opportunity you see. And I think the company also change along the way.
Exactly.
And what is a good time for a startup to connect with you? At what stage?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think it's maybe unsatisfactory. It depends. I don't think there's any one answer. We've had conversations with founders that are, still very early, maybe even pre-product. But it's interesting to sort of we're tracking throughout. But I will say I'm also very sensitive to time is our most precious resource, right? And so we don't want to take a founder's time if we're not going to be in a place to write a check today. So I think it's outreach and keeping folks informed, and it might be you're not a fit today or at the right stage today. But I encourage all founders to, if you're good about putting together a monthly or quarterly summary, keep that coming. I read those. Our team reads those. That's how we track and sort of stay on top of it. And that keeps you top of mind as well. Mm-hmm. Because I get that email and I see, company X is looking for Y. Okay, well, wait. Oh, that's interesting. How can I help? Who do I know? Or let me introduce you to another investor. And then when you show up knocking on our door, when you're ready to raise your Series A, I can go back and read all those emails and see the progress that's been made. Or we've had points of connectivity along the way. So I think focusing on that, like, again, back to the fundamentals, executing a good business and your strategy, recognizing, as you said, Christine, you may pivot along the way, and that's okay. So it's never a bad time or the wrong time to reach out. But I think finding ways to passively sort of keep, your stakeholders engaged is something that successful founders do well. And so, again, I would say that's a good way to stay on our radar if we do connect and it's too early for an investment.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your insight and your lessons learned that you share with us. And I really enjoy our conversation, and I learned a lot through this conversation that we have.
Oh, thank you, Christine. It was a lot of fun to chat with you, and hopefully we can get some more capital in the hands of some great women. That's our goal at Pivotal, and advancing women's power and influence. So anything I can do to share, what we're building and how we see the world, and hopefully share some lessons. It's a wonderful way to spend time with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.